On the night of my 70th birthday, I set the small cake my wife once loved on the table, turned on the porch light, letting the Travis Lake breeze roll in, like an old man trying to keep the door open for a few more hours, just to wait for the familiar sound of my son and daughter-in-law's car stopping at the gate. But what appeared on my phone screen wasn't "Happy birthday, Dad." It was a severe message, cold enough to feel like someone had laid the flat of an axe right on my chest. "We don't want you involved in our lives anymore. Please stop contacting us." And right below it, a heart reaction from his wife, like an official stamp erasing me from the family. If you've ever taken a slap that leaves no bruise but cracks your trust clean through, leave it and tell me where you're watching from. Thank you for staying with me this far. Late autumn afternoons at Lake Travis always carry a very particular kind of light, golden, muted, as if filtered through a thin dust of time. The lake lies still, reflecting each glimmer from the row of villas along the shore like flickering streaks of memory. My house stands quiet in that space, gray shingles weathered with age, a wooden porch with a few boards I replaced myself, and a stone wall I laid by hand 20 years ago. It always gave me a feeling both steady and solitary, a kind of loneliness that is very American, very Texas Hill Country. Tonight, all of that feels twice as heavy. I turned 70, no sound of a car pulling into the yard, no burst of laughter reaching in from the front door, not even the familiar "Happy birthday, Dad" I'd heard for more than 30 years, both when Linda was here and when it was just the two of us, father and son. Only the ticking of the clock on the living room wall, steady, cold, and blunt, like the nature of time itself. I sit in the chestnut-colored leather armchair Linda once said looked older than its owner, yet she was the one who secretly slipped a small pillow behind my back when she thought I wouldn't notice. The table lamp casts a warm glow on the book lying open, but I can't read a single word. My phone sits on the wooden side table. Each time the screen lights up from some email or advertisement notification, my heart skips, then sinks when I realize it isn't the person I've been waiting for. I've told myself Caleb is busy, that Sierra is hosting some charity event or photo shoot, that it's fine if they forgot. Every family has its careless moments, but those are just clumsy self-comforts. A son doesn't forget his father's birthday, unless he chooses to forget. I open the lid of the wooden box on the table. Inside is the pocket watch Linda gave me the first year we moved to Texas. A white-faced watch with blue steel hands, its ticking soft like breathing. Linda always said it looked classic, like me. Every time I wound it, she watched with eyes so gentle they made me want to live longer, just to keep that gaze on me. 12 years since she passed, the watch has never drifted more than half a minute. I pick it up, my fingers tracing the smooth chill of the metal, and for a moment, the house feels a little warmer. But the short ding of the phone pulled me back. It was a message, but not from Caleb, just a notification from the bank. I sighed, set the phone face down, but my hand hesitated. I wondered, how long had it been since I last reached out to my son? I turned the screen on. The screen glowed a faint blue. A long, empty stretch in our messages. The last contact from Caleb was 3 weeks ago, only to ask about the trust account. No words of concern, not even a simple, "How are you, Dad?" I stared at that line for a few seconds, then tapped into the message box. I erased it 3 times. I didn't want to seem like I needed anything, didn't want to bother him. In the end, I just wrote, "I miss you too. I hope you're well." A simple sentence. No demands, no blame. I hit send. Not even 30 seconds later, the phone vibrated. I saw Caleb's name appear. For a split second, I almost felt light. Maybe he really was just busy. Maybe we were only a little distant. Maybe I had worried too much. I opened the message. 2 short lines, cold and sharp as a blade. "We don't want you involved in our lives anymore. Please stop contacting us." I froze. In that moment, even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to stop. Not a fight, not hurt feelings, but a severance. A termination notice, dry as a corporate memo. Right beneath it, an icon appeared, a red heart. Sierra loved this message. I felt a chill run straight down my spine. Even when Caleb was hot-tempered, he had never used words like that. And Sierra? She didn't just agree, she approved. I set the phone on the table and leaned back in the chair. The silence filling the room now wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of emptiness. I opened the lid of the pocket watch again, as if trying to reassure myself I still had something left to hold on to. In the dim yellow light, the watch face reflected my image, older, more tired. Only the soft ticking of the hands connected me to Linda and the years of family that remained. Then the memories hit. The hospital scene, the recovery room, is blindingly white. Linda was lying there, her breath so faint that every inhale made me fear it would be her last. Caleb was 18 then, standing outside with swollen eyes. I remember his look, afraid, fragile, clinging to my hand as if I could keep his mother alive by sheer will. After the funeral, I had to learn to be both father and mother. I took him to college, helped him find his first job, and steadied him after the disastrous failure of his first startup. I stood by him when he lost direction. I was there through every trial. I tried to make sure he never felt unloved. Maybe I gave him too much. Maybe I compensated with money, hoping he'd feel my presence through support instead of the words I never knew how to say. And because of that, the message felt even more cruel. I tightened my grip on the watch. As my eyes drifted back to the phone screen, I heard a strange tick. The second hand on the watch stuttered, stopping exactly as I reread the line. Please don't contact us anymore. I didn't know why it stopped. Maybe the spring was weak. Maybe the shaft was worn. Or maybe the moment had simply gone on long enough for a man to understand that his silence had been taken advantage of. I straightened my back and closed my eyes for a few seconds. In that moment, in the quiet house by the lake, I understood one thing. My 70th birthday was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of something Caleb and Sierra never thought they would have. Boundaries. And beyond boundaries, there is action. I sat for a long moment after reading that message, as if the air in the room had solidified. When the numbness began to fade, what rose was not anger, but a deep, bottomless sadness. Part of that sadness came from what Caleb said. The other part came from me, because if I faced the truth, I had created exactly the kind of man who could send his father a message like that. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at Lake Travis, darkening under the night. The evening wind slipped through the cracks, carrying a cold dampness that reminded me of the years gone by, the kind of memories that grow sharper more you try to forget them, like the lights reflecting on the water. 10 years ago, Caleb was not like this. He was still immature, a bit reckless, but never uncaring. When Linda died, he was just old enough to withstand the grief, yet not strong enough to stand firm. I feared he would break. I feared he would feel deprived. I feared he would feel alone in a world too large for him. And from that fear, I began to compensate. Compensate by withdrawing his allowance every month. Compensate by moving him into a penthouse in Dallas when he said he needed creative space. Compensate by opening a small gallery for Sierra just because he said, "She's talented, Dad. She just needs capital." I agreed without hesitation. I did everything in silence, believing it was love. But blind love has a quiet way of turning into indulgence, and indulgence always becomes a burden, eventually. I remembered clearly how Walker and Hensley, the famous estate planning office in Dallas, convinced me to build a centralized payment system for management convenience. All of Caleb and Sierra's bills were funneled into a main account under the Brighton Heritage Trust. From the penthouse to parking fees, from gym memberships to gallery expenses, everything was automatically handled through centralized billing. Caleb didn't see a single bill for 8 years. Sierra never had to worry about a due date. Every time they used their cards, the credit line didn't bear their names. It was the Brighton Corporate Master account, a legal structure I could shut down at any moment without notice. They grew accustomed to swiping their cards at restaurants without checking the cost, accustomed to booking last-minute flights to Aspen without checking their budget, accustomed to everything, not because they had money, but because I had hidden the entire backstage for them. For 10 years, I kept telling myself that a father should do that. Lift, support, shield. But unintentionally, every dollar I paid built an invisible layer of expectation around Caleb. An expectation that made him believe every need was deserved, every want was reasonable, and everything he demanded from me was simply natural. I remembered the first time I realized it. It was an evening at the Dallas Country Club, where Caleb brought his ex-girlfriend, a blonde girl who laughed too sharply and spoke with that half-bragging, half-complaining tone typical of young high society. They invited me to dinner, and I thought it was a sign that Caleb wanted to be closer to me. I was wrong. When I gently mentioned that the monthly budget had gone over, Caleb set his whiskey glass down, his face flushing not from alcohol, but from wounded pride. "Dad, don't embarrass me in front of my girlfriend, okay?" He said it loudly enough for the next table to hear. The girl let out a laugh, leaning back in her chair, visibly annoyed. I stayed silent. Not because I feared his anger, but because in that moment I saw a young man drifting off course, and I didn't know how to call him back. When I stood to leave first, I heard the girl whisper, thinking I couldn't hear, "You really should cut him off, Caleb. Old people are such a hassle." And Caleb didn't deny it. That night, I drove back to the ranch where Linda and I once planted trees together. When I stepped inside, I searched for her last letter, the one I always kept hidden in the wooden drawer. Linda's handwriting was soft, like her weakening breath before she left me. In the middle of the page, one line froze me in place. "Don't let our son become a man who only knows how to receive." I folded the letter, as if folding it could make the worry disappear. But those words clung to my mind for years. I knew I was wrong. I knew I had let my grief blur boundaries. But I never dared fix it. Until tonight. When Linda's watch stopped ticking, when Caleb sent the message pushing me out of his life, all the pieces assembled into a picture painfully clear. I had raised my own son's ingratitude through blind affection. I had created a man who believed his father was a bank, a safety net, a key to every locked door, and not a human being with feelings. I sat back at my desk, opened the drawer, and took out my phone. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. Only a stillness remained, the stillness of someone waking from a decade-long trance. I tapped Walker's number, the man who had carefully built every financial mechanism for my family. When he answered, his voice carried the rustle of paperwork. "Sam, it's late. What's going on?" I looked at the stopped watch on the table and said, slow and certain, "We need to restructure the entire trust, starting tomorrow morning." On the other end, Walker was silent for a few seconds, long enough for me to hear him take a deep breath. "All right, I'll prepare it." I hung up. In the quiet house, I saw clearly something I had never dared face. For 10 years, I had given too much and kept nothing for myself. And tonight, I reclaimed that right, not through anger, but through clarity. The next morning, I left the house just as the sun peeked over the distant hills. Lake Travis was covered in a thin mist like the night's final breath, reflecting the first streaks of the new day. The air was cold enough to cut the skin, sharpening my senses with every step. The night had been long, yet strangely I didn't feel tired. Maybe because for the first time in many years, I knew exactly where I was headed. The city of Austin appeared after more than half an hour of driving, a stretch of glass and steel rising against a blue-gray sky. Walker and Hensley's headquarters sat inside a glass tower, more than 60 stories tall, right off Congress Avenue, where cars streamed endlessly like a river that never stopped. I parked in the garage and stepped into the lobby, where light poured through the glass ceiling, making the space glow in a cold and precise way. The receptionist recognized me and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Brighton. Attorney Walker is waiting in the conference room on the 42nd floor." I nodded and entered the elevator. In the mirrored walls, I saw a 70-year-old man with a calm face and alert eyes. No trace of last night's hesitation, only the quiet resolve of someone who had decided to end a decade of blindness. Walker was standing at the head of the conference table. In front of him were 3 thick folders, organized with colored tabs. His gray suit didn't have a single wrinkle, and the sharpness of his eyes behind the thin metal frames told me he'd stayed up preparing. "Sam," he said as I walked in, "I assume last night wasn't easy." I didn't answer directly. Instead, I placed Linda's pocket watch on the table. "Shall we begin?" Walker understood instantly. He signaled his assistant to close the door, then sat across from me. "Let me explain every step clearly," he began, pulling the first folder toward him. "The legal structure of the Brighton Heritage Trust, which we created 14 years ago, is a revocable living trust. That means you have full authority to modify it at any time. No one can legally object." He paused to make sure I was following. I nodded. "But once you choose to restate it, to rewrite the entire trust in a new form, and convert it into a charitable perpetual trust, then those terms become irrevocable. No one can touch it. No one can sue. No one can change it back." I asked, "And Caleb can't find a way to reverse it?" "No chance," Walker replied firmly. "When you sign the new restated trust, you transfer all assets into a charitable purpose, and you retain management rights only during your lifetime. After you pass, everything belongs to the foundation, not to the family branch." I drew a deep breath. "Good. Continue." Walker opened the second folder. "The first section, beneficiary list. We revised it according to your request." I turned the page. Caleb and Sierra's names were gone. A blank white space sat where their names used to be, so starkly empty it made my chest tighten for a moment. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by clarity. Clarity I had avoided for far too long. Walker continued. "Second section, corporate lease for the penthouse in Dallas. Because the contract was signed under the trust through the Brighton corporate master account, we can legally terminate it after a 60-day notice period. The building owner will send the notice of termination today." I asked, "How long can they stay?" "About 2 months, no more," Walker answered. "And the Range Rover?" "Same situation," he said immediately. "Because the leasing agreement is under the corporate account, not Caleb's personal name, we're entitled to request vehicle repossession within 15 days. No legal recourse on their side." Walker opened the detailed credit line chart. "Final section, Brighton Corporate Master Account. Credit lines. We can reduce the credit limit to 0 immediately. This is valid because all their expenses were made as authorized users, not primary account holders. You can block their access without violating any regulations." I looked at the clear 0 on the page. 10 years of Caleb living detached from financial reality, about to end with one simple decision. As Walker explained each detail, light from the tall glass window behind him spilled across the table, and Linda's pocket watch lay there, reflecting the warm morning glow of Austin. I looked at it, feeling as though Linda were somewhere in the room, quietly watching, gently nodding each time I signed a new document. At one point, I brushed a fingertip across the watch face. It was cold, but the coldness steadied me, as if I were holding on to the last piece of Linda, so I wouldn't waver in the face of such large decisions. Walker slid the final folder toward me. "This is the restated Brighton Heritage Trust, the full rewrite of the asset structure, management authority, beneficiaries, and the commitment to convert everything into a charitable fund upon your passing. If you sign the first page, we officially begin the process." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I felt no doubt. I read every word of the first sentence. I, Samuel Edwin Brighton, fully aware and of my own volition, hereby restate the entirety of my estate. I signed. A thin, steady black line crossed the page. Walker didn't speak at first. He simply stood, placed a hand on my shoulder, and squeezed lightly. You did the right thing. I looked at Linda's pocket watch once more. From today on, I said softly, no one gets to take advantage of my kindness again. Outside the glass wall, the city of Austin glowed under the early sunlight, and inside the room, my signature set into motion, a vast legal machine, one that would redraw every boundary I had once allowed others to cross. I was not in Dallas that noon. Everything I am about to recount, I pieced together from three things: the transaction log copies the bank sent to Walker, the live stream Sierra accidentally broadcast publicly before people re-uploaded it everywhere, and the internal report from the restaurant that my attorney included in the dispute file with the card company. Putting them together, I could see almost every second of that lunch, clearer than if I had sat there myself. Dallas that noon was full of sunlight and dry wind. The glass buildings along Flora Street bounced bright light onto the pavement, making the entire arts district shimmer as if coated in a thin layer of silver. The Hall Artisan Brasserie, the restaurant Caleb and Sierra loved most, sat right beside Salmon's Park, where Dallas locals went to meet clients, take pictures, or display their polished lifestyles. Caleb and Sierra chose an outdoor table beneath a large white umbrella. On the table were pale yellow mimosas, a plate of hot truffle fries, and Sierra's leather handbag tilted just enough to show the new designer logo she had flaunted on Instagram 2 hours earlier. Everything looked perfect, at least until the bill arrived. The server, a young man in a neat uniform, smiled and set the leather folder before Caleb. Here is your check, sir. Caleb took it, nodded slightly, and handed over the familiar black card. With that card, he had never imagined a world where anything except approved existed. His confidence radiated so naturally that even Sierra didn't bother glancing at the bill. The server took a few steps away and swiped the card. A small beep sounded. A red line of text appeared on the machine. He looked at the card, tried again. Still a beep. Still the same line. The server returned, bowing slightly. Sir, it seems the card was declined. Caleb smirked, unbothered. Impossible. Try it again. The server walked back. Beep. This time, the error beep was longer and clearer. Caleb began to lose patience, though he kept his posture. Give it here. Let me see. Sierra tilted her head, frowning. Maybe the machine's glitching. These fancy restaurants get that sometimes. Caleb flipped the card over as if checking for scratches. Try your card, he muttered. Sierra opened her wallet, the cream-colored one she had just bought at Highland Park Village, then handed the Visa Infinite to the server. He walked to the machine again. Beep? Sierra narrowed her eyes. Excuse me, are you swiping it correctly? Ma'am, the machine says it cannot process the transaction. Caleb sat up straight, his face tightening. The two women at the next table, both in office attire, had begun glancing over. One whispered to the other, loud enough for Sierra to hear. Brighton! Aren't they supposed to be really rich? What's happening? Caleb heard it, but pretended not to. Sierra, however, could not hold it together. She turned on her phone camera and said irritably, This is what happens when a restaurant uses outdated POS machines. 2 cards declined. Unbelievable. The server gently interrupted, trying to keep his voice low, but unable to avoid nearby customers' ears. Ma'am, our machines were replaced last week. If you like, I can call the manager to check. But the comment only fueled the fire. The tables nearby began murmuring louder. I heard some big family trusts are having issues lately. Who knows? Sometimes people only look rich. Sierra heard every word. Her face flushed red, nowhere to hide. Her live stream, originally meant to complain about the restaurant, had turned into a double-edged blade. Comments started pouring in. What's going on with the Brighton family? Overspent much? Honestly, the husband looked stressed. Sierra ended the live stream abruptly, her hand trembling. Caleb was truly panicking now. He searched his wallet for another card. None. He opened his banking app. Couldn't log in. He checked his email. No notices. Everything was collapsing in front of dozens of eyes. A scene Caleb had never imagined could happen to him. With no options left, Caleb whispered, "Could you bring the machine to another table for me? It's a bit noisy here." But the server shook his head. "Sir, I already tried with both machines. If you'd like to continue using your card, you may call your bank to verify." The sentence hit like a final blow. Sierra stared at the ground, her hand gripping her bag strap. Eventually, they called one of Sierra's friends, a girl from her yoga group, to bring cash. She walked into the restaurant in activewear and asked loudly, "Oh my God, you two can't pay for this meal?" The entire section looked over. Caleb wished he could disappear. When they left the restaurant, Caleb pulled out his phone immediately. He dialed my number for the first time in 3 weeks. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then went straight to voicemail. The automated voice echoed colder than any rebuke. "The number you have reached is not available. Please leave a message." Caleb stood frozen outside the restaurant as the Dallas wind slapped his face. Sierra stared at the screen, then said through clenched teeth, "Are you kidding me? What is wrong with your father, Caleb?" No one answered, because for the first time in his life, Caleb understood something. The world he thought belonged to him had never been his. I learned these details only days later, when Walker sent me the transaction summary and the restaurant staff called the law office to verify the account holder. Sitting in my study by Lake Travis, hearing each line recounted, I did not feel triumphant. I only felt one thing. For the first time, Caleb tasted the loss of control that, for 10 years, he had unknowingly forced me to endure on his behalf. Everything that happened in Dallas that day, from the building lobby to the penthouse to the boutique at Highland Park Village, I didn't need to be there to know every detail. Walker forwarded me the real-time payment decline logs from the bank. Building management sent email reports about the cleaning service being suspended, and the videos of Sierra being filmed inside the boutique were sent to me via iMessage before she even had the chance to delete them. When pieced together, the picture was chillingly clear. Dallas the next afternoon was blazing hot like an oven, the heat rippling off the asphalt, enough to distort everything like a warped mirror. Caleb's penthouse sat high above it all, but no matter how high they lived, nothing waiting for them could be escaped. When Caleb and Sierra stepped into the lobby, the glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the receptionist's face stiffened for a brief second when she saw them. "Good afternoon," the receptionist said, though her eyes wavered with hesitation. "I need to inform you of something." Caleb's face tightened immediately. "What now?" "The cleaning service for your unit was suspended this morning. The company reported that the payment could not be processed." Sierra froze as if pulled backward by an invisible hand. "Impossible. That service is on autopay." The receptionist remained polite, but could not hide her discomfort. "Your autopay is suspended. I'm only relaying system information." Caleb said nothing, gripping the bag strap until his knuckles whitened. When they stepped into the penthouse, the first thing they noticed was an unpleasant, lingering smell, the remnants of last night's takeout, untouched because housekeeping never came. Sierra grimaced. "We can't live like this," she snapped. Caleb opened the fridge for lunch, but instead of neatly arranged meal prep boxes like every day, only a few cans of sparkling water and an old fruit container remained. Sierra checked her phone. They said the meal prep service stopped too. Reason: card on file declined. Caleb slammed the fridge door shut. "Everything is falling apart." By late afternoon, another message crushed Sierra completely. "Your gym membership has been canceled due to failed billing." She screamed, "No, that's my gym. I've checked in there for 2 years." Caleb growled. "Everything runs on the trust's corporate card. If my father shut it all off?" This is obvious. Sierra threw her gym towel onto the carpet. What does he want from us? Why go this far? Caleb had no answer. He leaned against the kitchen counter, as if patience alone could bring things back to normal. But his phone buzzed non-stop like a never-ending mocking soundtrack. The next alert came from Instagram. Your verification badge has been removed. Sierra froze. She opened Instagram and saw the blue checkmark she had been so proud of. Completely gone. No way. I lost my verified badge. Her voice trembled like someone losing balance. Caleb asked, why? Because my account got flagged for abnormal payment activity. They said I need to verify my payment information or they'll remove the badge. Sierra nearly shrieked. For her, losing the blue checkmark was like being erased from the world she had fought to build. For someone with a lifestyle persona, losing verification was a symbol of decline, failure, being looked down on. And the worst moment came at the end of the day. Sierra stopped by a boutique in Highland Park Village to return a dress she no longer liked. A routine habit, she changed outfits several times a week to keep her online image fresh. Caleb waited outside in the car, trying to call the bank, while his head felt ready to explode. Inside the boutique, Sierra placed her bag on the counter. I'd like to return this. The store clerk swiped Sierra's card. A beep. No one thought much of it. Sierra forced a smile. Try again, please. The clerk tried again. Beep. A third time. Beep. The screen flashed a bright red message. Declined. The clerk looked at Sierra with polite but cautious eyes. Your card isn't working. A customer behind her giggled. Wait, isn't that Sierra Brighton? Lost her blue check? Now her card declines too? Worse, another young woman pulled out her phone to record. OMG, you guys look. An influencer who can't return a dress because her card failed. Sierra stepped back, her face drained. Stop recording, she screamed. But it was too late. The clip hit TikTok in less than an hour, captioned mockingly, Luxury lifestyle on monthly payments meets billing error. The boutique had to keep the dress because the system couldn't process the refund. Sierra walked out of the store, tears streaming, humiliated, confused, and terrified all at once. She dove into the car and slammed the door. Caleb, I can't do this anymore. This is hell. Caleb gripped his hair, trying not to lose control. You think I want this? Then who caused all of it? Sierra snapped, her eyes red and swollen. You think everything just glitched on its own. Caleb stared straight ahead, voice hoarse. My father is sabotaging us. It can't be anyone else. Sierra punched the dashboard. Does he want us to drown? Caleb clenched the steering wheel until his tendons showed. Perfect, polished, luxurious. The entire image they lived inside was collapsing faster than they could comprehend. And this was only the beginning. I learned all of this when Walker forwarded the chain of notifications and when Sierra's clip spread across TikTok. Sitting in my study by Lake Travis, I watched each report appear like links snapping one by one, not out of satisfaction, but to understand that. Finally, the two of them had to face the reality I had avoided for 10 years. That morning in Dallas, I knew exactly what was waiting for the two of them because I had asked Walker to forward. Every leasing system notice synced with the trust. Their penthouse suddenly felt unnervingly quiet. No steady hum of the air conditioner, no scent of expensive coffee brewed each morning by the private chef. I saw Caleb open the door through the building's hallway camera feed, his eyes landing right on the white sheet with the red border that I already knew would appear. Notice to cure. 14 days. Sierra walked up, her face stripped of the pride she usually carried. Caleb tore the notice open and read it, and I saw his reaction clearly. He stood still, as if someone had just pulled out the last pillar, holding him up. I had cut off every payment from the trust, so the building was required to issue the notice by regulation, 2 months of unpaid lease. Sierra asked why our home even has a lease, and Caleb, almost desperate, had to admit the penthouse was under Brighton corporate leasing, paid entirely by me for many years. I watched that moment and understood how hard the truth was for them to accept. 14 days later, every bill stacked up by the hour. Cleaning service stopped. The private chef stopped. Every service sustained by the corporate card was cut. I knew they called the building office, but no one responded because the contract was already suspended. On day 14, when Caleb checked the mailbox, I had predicted exactly the look he would have when he saw the second notice. Notice to vacate. 30 days. He stood still for a few seconds, not angry, not yelling, just the heavy silence of someone who finally understood the game had changed. Sierra's hands trembled as she read the bolded line, and then I saw the question fall from her lips. Are we about to be evicted? Caleb only nodded, as if acknowledging what he had avoided all his life. Everything he thought he owned had never belonged to him. That afternoon, Sierra went downstairs, trying to hire a private cleaning service. I watched from the lobby camera. Just as she approached the concierge, a yellow tow truck stopped in front of the glass doors. 2 workers stepped out, carrying the exact file I had signed the order for 3 days earlier. The concierge asked which vehicle they were retrieving, and they answered clearly, the white Range Rover, Brighton Corporate Leasing. I saw Sierra freeze, her lips losing all color as she heard every word. She tried to argue that it was my car, but the towing staff simply handed over the clipboard with the lawful repossession order. Caleb ran out of the elevator, trying to stop the tow, but building security stood between them, speaking with a politeness so sharp it became cruel. Sir, please remain calm. I watched Caleb clench his fists, powerless. Sierra stood beside him, gripping her bag strap, her eyes hollow. The Range Rover was lifted and pulled away, its wheels rising off the tiled driveway, moving slowly, yet heavy enough to drag away the last piece of dignity they believed they had. As the vehicle disappeared beyond the camera's frame and the building doors closed behind them, Caleb exhaled like someone who had just slipped off a cliff's edge, then admitted to Sierra, "We can't stay here anymore." And when Sierra asked, "Where do we go?" I saw Caleb open the drawer by the door and take the old silver key, the only thing that truly belonged to him. We drive the sedan back to Austin. I have to see my father. Reflected on the building's glass door, I saw the silhouettes of the 2 of them walking into the afternoon sun, and I understood that when the final layer of luxury peeled away, the only truth left was this. Everything they once clung to had already vanished. Looking back at the I-35 stretch that afternoon, I can still clearly picture the old 2012 sedan Caleb was forced to drive, the car he once mocked as not fitting the new image. I monitored through the Travis Lake security cameras and from the route reports sent by the old vehicle's tracking system. The day he received that sedan, I installed the GPS in case he ever got into an accident on the road. Even now, the device still works. I watched through the neighborhood cameras and through the updates the car system sent, enough for me to know exactly where they were on that highway, even though they had no idea they were being tracked. I saw Sierra turn her face toward the window, distraught, and Caleb gripping the steering wheel like a man afraid that letting go would drop him into a void. I knew the argument in the car began the moment they left Dallas. Sierra's voice sharp as a blade when she demanded, "What are you going to tell your father? Sorry for living off his money?" And I saw Caleb struggle to stay composed, but their back and forth slipped quickly into the darkest zones. Blame, excuses, bitterness, shame. I didn't hear them directly, but I knew every word. I've seen enough young couples collapse the moment the money disappears. Caleb's driving rhythm, every clench of the wheel, every abrupt lane change said more than their voices could. My mind drifted back to Caleb 7 years ago, standing in my study, eagerly asking for seed money for his startup. I signed a no-interest loan, the only requirement being a monthly report. He quit after 4 months. I covered the losses silently, never mentioning it again. He never apologized either. I also remembered Sierra, how she bragged about the penthouse as if it were our family's asset, that overconfident tone I heard in a tagged video from her friend group. All of that had now turned into cold ash, scattered along the highway I watched through traffic cameras. Two children who built an entire life on foundations that never belonged to them. I recognized the moment they touched the truth. Caleb tilting his head, lips pressed together, his gaze sinking as he said the words I had waited years for him to realize on his own. We've never supported ourselves. Sierra rested her head against the window, not arguing, only releasing a breath of a sentence. I know. It wasn't maturity. It was simply the final crack of an illusion they had clung to for far too long. As the car drove deeper into Austin's outskirts, I saw through the security cameras lining my driveway Caleb's old sedan turning onto the stone-paved road leading to the estate. The evening light fell across Lake Travis, glowing red like embers, and the dull silver body of the car reflected it as if burning too. I stood by the second-floor study window, watching them stop in front of the gate. From where I stood, the car and the two people inside it looked strangely small, stripped entirely of their former polish. Sierra bowed her head, fingers intertwined. Caleb leaned back in the seat, eyes fixed on the black iron gate. I knew they were hoping it would open automatically, like always. But today, it stayed still, exactly as I intended, a perfect symbol of what they had lost. And I simply stood there, my hand resting on Linda's pocket watch, watching those two people whom, for so many years, I had failed to teach the most important lesson of all. No one gets to step into another person's world when they've forgotten how to stand on their own feet. That afternoon, the Texas sky was so clear that the sunlight stretched across the lake like golden threads. I stood in the garden, pruning shears in hand, tending to the Linda's Promise rose bush, the variety Linda once said would bloom best on the days when my heart finally felt quiet again. As I leaned in to trim a branch, I heard the soft chime from the security system. Unauthorized vehicle, perimeter alert. I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this moment for 3 days since the Range Rover was towed in Dallas. I walked to the control panel in the garage and looked at the gate camera feed. Caleb's 2012 sedan was stopped in front of the black iron gate, its hazard lights blinking weakly like the two people sitting inside. The gate system had switched to no visitor mode exactly as scheduled, meaning that no matter how much they pressed, shouted, or pounded, it would remain still as a statue. I saw Caleb step out first, walking fast, breathing hard, carrying a kind of anxious urgency he used to reserve only for work or himself. Sierra followed, her hands shaking, eyes red. Caleb pressed the intercom once, then twice, 3 times. By the 7th attempt, the system triggered an internal alert. Repeated forced entry attempt. Security team alerted. I didn't need to do anything. Walker had already called the neighborhood security ahead of time, instructing them to follow the villa protocol exactly. I returned to the garden. I didn't want to hear pleading, accusations, or excuses. I put on the new noise-canceling headphones I bought last month and turned on Bach, Concerto No. 3, Linda's favorite. The violin and piano blended like someone gently running a hand down my spine, smudging out every sound beyond the garden. On the phone screen in my pocket, I could still see them, but without audio, only the silent image of 2 grown children who had never truly grown up standing before a locked gate. Sierra began to cry, her mouth open wide, her shoulders shaking. A few neighbors passed by on their afternoon walk, the group of 3 from the house on the left, and the elderly couple with the dog down the road. They paused, looked over, curiosity mixed with caution. The louder Sierra cried, the more exposed the scene became. No one spoke, no one intervened. In neighborhoods like this, boundaries are understood clearly. Another family's affairs are not to be entered. But their eyes, I knew, were enough to make Sierra feel isolated, exposed, and humiliated in a way she had never endured before. Caleb pounded on the intercom again, his face flushed like he had swallowed burning coals. Watching through the camera, I felt something unmistakable. This wasn't revenge. This was the lesson I owed myself for 10 years. When Bach reached its crescendo, the security team arrived. 2 officers in dark blue uniforms driving the Lakeview Estates patrol vehicle. They stepped out, speaking to Caleb with the seriousness and politeness characteristic of high-end neighborhood security. No raised voices, no hostility, only regulation as the blade to end everything cleanly. I heard their voices through the internal feed. Sir, the neighborhood is currently in restricted mode. Without resident clearance, you will need to leave the area. Caleb tried to explain, pointing at the gate, the camera, the house. Sierra cried harder, nearly holding on to Caleb to stay upright, but the officers repeated, "You do not have authorization to be here. Please relocate." Caleb turned to the gate one last time, eyes red, lips trembling. I saw him mouth the words, "Dad, please." No sound, only the image, and I stood in the garden, Bach still flowing, making one final cut on a newly opened rose. A petal fell, spinning once before resting on the ground. The security officers gestured toward the main exit. Caleb lowered his head. Sierra wiped her tears with shaking hands. They turned back to the car and got in. The sedan door closed with a small, dry thud, yet it pierced the air like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. The car rolled away, slow, exhausted, weighted like 2 people who had just lost their entire world. I removed my headphones and heard again the wind moving through the garden, the soft ripple of the lake. The gate stayed closed, the house stayed still, and I stood there, in Linda's rose garden, knowing that this moment marked the complete end of an era, and opened the door to the rest of the story I would write with my own hands. That night, Lake Travis was as flat as glass. Moonlight stretched across the water in a thin, cold, silent band, quiet enough that I could hear the soft tap of leaves brushing the wooden railing. I sat in my study, the single desk lamp casting a warm glow over the folder Walker had sent that afternoon. I was reviewing the final clause of the trust when my phone began to vibrate. 1 call, then 2, then 3. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I set the phone down. It vibrated again. 7 calls. 12. 23. By the 40th, the calls no longer came individually. They rolled into a continuous chain of alerts, like someone pounding on an invisible door. I didn't answer. Everything was logged automatically. Time, minute, duration of each ring. I kept reading the documents. For nearly 3 hours, the phone did not stop. At the 97th call, it finally went silent. 3 seconds later, a voicemail icon appeared. I tapped it as a formality, expecting nothing, only curious what they would say when my gate no longer let them in. Voicemail 1, Caleb's voice, dry and bitter. "Dad, I know you're listening. I don't understand why you're doing this. You think this is right? You're destroying our lives. Open the gate. Answer the phone." No apology. No responsibility. Only blame. I saved the voicemail. Voicemail 2, Sierra's voice, urgent but strained. "You need to listen to us. Caleb is really stressed. This isn't a joke. We're in danger. Do you understand what happens to us without that support?" She used the words "in danger" as if losing access to inheritance money were a humanitarian crisis. I saved it. Voicemail 3, Sierra, drunk. Her voice slurred, stretched, and sharp like vodka mixed wrong. I'm not giving up. Do you hear me? I won't. You owe us. We deserve that money. We deserve it. You can't just close your gate and pretend we don't exist." A warped laugh rang at the end, the sound of someone completely lost. I listened to all of it, then pressed save. I sent all 3 files to Walker with a short message. Keep as evidence. We will need it. Walker replied almost immediately. Received. I'll add them to the behavioral evidence section. I placed the phone on the desk. Linda's pocket watch lay beside it, its glass face catching the lamp's warm glow. I opened the lid. The second hand, which had stopped the night of my birthday, gave a faint twitch, then began ticking again, slow but steady. I don't believe in omens, but that moment made it impossible not to wonder. Maybe Linda wanted me to finish this the clearest way possible. I closed the watch and called Walker again. When he answered, I spoke a single sentence, short, firm, and cold. Prepare the final delivery meeting. It's time. He was silent for a few seconds, then replied with a professional but knowing tone. Yes, Samuel. We'll finalize everything by the end of the week. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the steady tick of the watch in the quiet room. From that moment, I knew they had just pushed everything toward an ending they themselves had helped create, and all I had left to do was walk the remaining stretch, calm, clear, and without turning back. That morning, the Austin sky was so clear, it looked as if every cloud had been washed out of it. I sat in my study, opening my email to check whether Walker had finished drafting the final document for the upcoming meeting. At that exact moment, his new message appeared, the subject line sharp and concise in true Walker fashion. Brighton Legacy Trust, mandatory meeting regarding future provisions. I read the subject again. It was formal enough to create expectation, vague enough to make the recipients believe there was still a way back. Exactly the kind of false light Caleb and Sierra had always chased. Walker added, Send exactly at 9:00 a.m. They will open it immediately. I replied, Send it. Less than 5 minutes later, the system reported the email had been opened. Then another notification, viewed a second time. I could clearly imagine their expressions as if they had just spotted a lifeline drifting past while they were drowning. On the other side of Dallas, the email had exactly the effect Walker predicted. Caleb read the subject aloud, his voice filled with a kind of fragile relief. Dad wants to meet. Mandatory meeting. He must have changed his mind. Sierra stood up instantly. So, this means we have a chance to get everything back, right? The trust still has hope? Caleb nodded with full conviction, the kind of nod only someone who has spent their whole life relying on money and has never imagined a door might close on them could give. I knew they would misunderstand, and because I knew, I had Walker write the email in the exact tone of legal, unclear, suggestive of hope. I opened the Brighton Corporate Leasing Asset Management app, the smart home system for the penthouse the company installed the day Caleb moved in, to check whether they were still there or had left. Caleb and Sierra were sitting in the living room, rehearsing apologies, like two amateur actors trying to produce emotions they did not actually feel. Caleb stood before the mirror, fixing his collar. We're sorry. We were too stressed. We didn't mean what we said. Sierra stood beside him, eyes opened, just slightly wider to look sincere. We're grateful for everything you've done. We were just overwhelmed. I turned the screen off. Once upon a time, 10 years ago, I would have wanted to hear that apology. Now it was nothing more than a faulty recording played at a time when everything was far too late. While they practiced their lines, the outside world reminded them again of where they truly stood. The clip of Sierra being declined at the boutique, the moment she shouted into the camera only to be told to stop filming, had reached more than 2.4 million views. Mockery, memes, duets, everything. The top comment read, Thought they lived luxury. Turns out they're just trust fund dependent. Sierra curled over on the sofa, crying as she scrolled. Caleb tried to console her, but his face paled too, because that same clip had reached his company's HR. At 3:00 that afternoon, he received an email. Due to recent public behavior that affects company image, your contract will not be renewed. I didn't need to intervene. They had created every axe that now fell on their own heads. By evening, when their desperation scraped bottom, they still clung to Walker's email like the last remaining float. Caleb exhaled, saying, "Tomorrow we meet Dad. Everything will be fine. He won't abandon me." Sierra wiped smudged mascara, her voice breaking, "As long as the trust is restored, that's all we need." I replayed Sierra's third voicemail, the drunken one she didn't remember leaving. "We deserve that money." I filed it under evidence behavior, just as Walker instructed. Everything had to be documented, by procedure, by law. The next morning, I saw a camera alert. They had left Dallas. Sierra wore a beige dress and dark sunglasses to hide the swelling. Caleb wore a pale blue shirt, neatly buttoned, like someone preparing to meet a superior. They got into the old sedan and drove straight toward Austin. I closed Linda's watch and slipped it into my pocket, then sent Walker a single message. "It's time." The final meeting had been waiting for them for a long while, but not in the way they believed. 1 week after that email, the Austin afternoon sank beneath sunlight, sharp as a blade, reflecting off the cold glass faces of the tower where Walker and Hensley kept their headquarters. I stepped out of the elevator on the 46th floor, the hallway carpeted in soft gray that seemed to swallow every sound. The glass conference room door opened, revealing a space so bright it almost hurt to look at, a kind of brightness that leaves no room for hiding from the truth. I sat at the head of the table. In front of me, as a ritual I kept to stay steady, lay Linda's pocket watch. The second hand had been ticking again ever since the day I decided to restructure the trust, as if it understood its owner had finally reclaimed his boundaries. Caleb and Sierra entered a few minutes after me. Both were dressed neatly, as if preparing for a family reconciliation. I said nothing. Walker simply gestured for them to sit, then placed before each of them a copy of the restated Brighton Heritage Trust. Nearly 100 pages thick, Caleb opened the document. The first page, my signed declaration, seemed to make his hand tremble slightly. Walker spoke directly, without circling around it. "We will begin with Section 3.1. Caleb flipped to the page, read for a few seconds, and then stopped entirely. I watched his face change, first surprise, then a rigid, breathless stillness. Section 3.1. Beneficiary list. The names Caleb Brighton and Sierra Brighton removed entirely. No footnotes, no gray explanations. Absolute emptiness. Sierra lifted her head, her lips trembling. Caleb swallowed hard and moved to the next section at Walker's instruction. Section 5.1. Monthly allowance. The $25,000 monthly allowance permanently terminated. Sierra's face drained of color. Caleb blinked rapidly, as if hoping to see the word temporary, but there was none. Walker kept the same even, emotionless tone. Next, Section 7.4. Section 7.4. Dallas penthouse lease. Termination notice effective under the standard 60-day legal cycle. Sierra squeezed her hands tightly together, whispering, barely audible, "No, no way." Caleb turned to the final part of the next section, Section 8.0, Corporate Credit Lines. All credit lines, permanently closed. No reinstatement possible. The room went so silent, the ticking of Linda's watch sounded like a metronome, marking their unraveling. Sierra looked at me, eyes reddening. "Then, where does the money go?" Walker turned toward me, giving me the floor. I rested my hand on Linda's watch and spoke slowly, each word deliberate, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but simply because the truth had finally reached its appointed time. No more money will go into the lifestyle you two depended on. The entire asset, $34 million of the Brighton heritage, will transfer to the Brighton Educational Endowment. Sierra recoiled. Scholarship? For who?" I answered in the same calm tone I'd used reading the watering schedule for my garden. "For construction majors at Dallas State University." Caleb's head snapped up. I looked him straight in the eyes. No softness, no retreat into old habits. The school you dropped out of after I paid 2 full years of your tuition. The words fell onto the glass table like a verdict, precise, quiet, cutting straight into the deepest part of Caleb's remaining pride. Sierra broke into tears, burying her face in her hands. Caleb didn't cry. He didn't speak. His eyes were hollow, like a room stripped bare. Walker gently pushed the recorder to the center of the table. Today's meeting will be recorded under Texas law to confirm the amendments to the restated trust. I no longer looked at Caleb. I simply closed Linda's watch, hearing the small click echo through the bright glass room, a sound marking the end of a chapter. Caleb stared at the papers before him, his eyes red but dry. Finally, he let out a long, exhausted breath, like someone who had lost everything and still hadn't fully understood how. Sierra could only cry, her soft sobs breaking the sterile quiet. The new trust was a death sentence for their way of living, but it was the fairest judgment I had ever signed. And this was not the final part. 6 months passed quietly, like the surface of Lake Travis at dawn. Flat, still, but with slow movements beneath that no one could see. The Brighton Educational Endowment had officially begun operating, and today was its first scholarship ceremony. The auditorium of Dallas State University was decorated simply with soft golden lights, nothing extravagant but warm. I stood on the stage. Below me were nearly 100 construction major students, young faces holding on to their dreams, despite tuition and circumstance. They looked at me not as a wealthy old man, but as someone laying a brick for their path forward. I adjusted the microphone, my voice low but steady. Legacy is not money, it is responsibility. Applause rose, not dramatic, not thunderous, just enough to remind me of Linda, who always believed the best thing a person could leave behind was the way they lifted someone else. I looked at the front row where the first students of the endowment sat. A Mexican student with calloused hands from construction shifts, a young woman with her hair tied back, her face marked by perseverance through hardship. They were proof that what I did was right, even if the price of learning that lesson had not been small. After the ceremony, I returned to Austin. The road back to Lake Travis wore a soft orange glow, as if someone had laid a cushion over every hill. When I stepped out of the car, I heard water tapping gently against the shore. The wind smelled of soil after last night's rain. I walked straight to the back garden, the place Linda had spent years tending to her roses. The Linda's promise bush, her hybrid, bloomed fuller than the others, its pale petals like her soft breath. I held the watering can, gently pouring water over each branch. Only when tending these roses did I feel neither anger nor bitterness, only clarity and peace. Just as I bent down to remove a wilted leaf, my phone vibrated lightly in my pocket. 1 beat, 2 beats. I took it out. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me stop. The message opened. A single word. Dad? No explanation, no apology. Just one word, enough to carry hesitation, shame, and a desire to return without knowing how. I leaned against the wooden table Linda used to love, looking out at the lake turning gold in the evening light. A gentle breeze rippled the surface like the heartbeat of someone trying to reach back toward a life they lost. I smiled, not the smile of victory, but of someone who had walked a long circle to find his own footing again. I replied with only 4 words, enough distance, enough openness. Sometimes, distance is the only way back. I set the phone face down on the table. No further messages, no rush to forgive, no closing of the door, just leaving it there for another day, a day when both sides might be ready. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the last light fell across Linda's pocket watch, making the second hand shimmer as if smiling. Today I had nothing left to lose, but nothing left to be taken either, and as Linda once said, no one is born to be indulged. Everyone must learn to stand on their own feet. Caleb and Sierra, wherever they were in whatever small apartment they now lived, were perhaps finally learning that lesson. And I, for the first time in many years, felt that the legacy I left behind had gone to the right people, in the right place, with the right meaning. If you've stayed until this final moment and felt the cost of boundaries, of growth, and of dignity, leave a "So I know you're still here. Thank you for listening. Your presence is something I truly cherish." And if you wish to follow more stories, where even silence can become a weapon, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter.